Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to welcome you in the name of the British Chamber of Commerce in Germany to today's webinar, Germany After the Election, organized by the BCCG in the UK, represented by its 3 regions, with Alexander Altman as chairman for Scotland and Northern England, Christian Keogh for the Midlands and Wales, and myself, Jörg von Massenbach, for London and Southern England. And quite a result it is. It also marks the end of an era, 16 years of Angela Merkel. Therefore, I'm pleased to welcome our distinguished expert panel, moderated by Stefanie Bolzen of Die Welt in London. Thank you to Stefanie, thank you to our panelists, thank you to everybody who joined us this morning. And therefore, I do not want to stand any longer between you and an exciting discussion. Stefanie, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jörg. And I'm delighted to do this morning. And I'm really delighted with the speakers we have. On the one hand, that's Alexander Kulitz, who is still, so to say, in office as an MP in the 19th German Bundestag, which constitutionally is still working until the 26th of October, when supposedly there is the constitutional voting in Berlin. He was an MP for the FDP, for the Liberals in Germany, and also a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. He's a lawyer by training and also runs his own company near Ulm. I was wondering whether that's actually Bavaria or Baden-Württemberg. You need to tell us. I think it's just on the border. And also he has been very outspoken in the past about the lack of reforms in Germany and the administrative burden on German companies. That's something very interesting maybe to hear about, and what the reform necessities are in Germany for the next government. And then we are also really delighted to have Bobby Verdrell here. He's been in the City of London for more than 20 years and currently works there at the hedge fund Tosca Fund, and was previously a partner at Goldman Sachs. And he's very, very active, writing a macro political monthly newsletter called Macro Eagle, and works a lot on British-German relations. He's also has both citizenships, and for example, he's a governor at the Ditchley Foundation. So with no further ado, I would like to start with you, Alexander, if I may. And I think we are in a very privileged situation with you, because you are not going to be in the Bundestag now after or with the next government. And so I hope you can quite freely tell us what is actually happening in Berlin. And if I may ask you what your thoughts are, because we know that the Greens and the Liberals have already started talking to each other, which is something very exciting. And they want to find out how they can agree, and then they actually go to the big parties and tell them what they want. So what do you hear, and what do you think we can expect? Thank you, Alexander.
Absolutely. Thanks, Stefanie. Yes, I'm very delighted to be here this morning, and thanks for the invitation. Yes, well, it's true. The Green Party and the Free Democratic Party, the Liberals, have already started negotiations. On Wednesday, tomorrow, we're going to have a formal, if you want to, we call it pre-sondation between the two parties. The main idea is, as you mentioned, we want to clear our lines, and we want to define our lines, or at least the minimum that we expect from the big parties before we start negotiating with the big parties. We don't want to be, well, how should you call it, separate. I mean, we are very contradictive in our programs, but at least we want to clear for ourselves what we actually expect from these negotiations before we start talking to either parties, the Social Democrats and the Christian Union. Yesterday, we had our first meeting in Berlin, the party meeting, and our party leader, Christian Lindner, who's going to talk tomorrow together with the General Secretary, Mr. Wissing, with the Green Party. Yes, we discuss how we're going to attack the topics, and what are the limits that the Free Democratic Party is setting up, if we and the limits we will not be discussing on. So there is a few things that we are not willing to discuss in any way. So one is definitely a raise of tax. and the other one is what we call the Schuldenbremse, so the debts, that there is a limitation of debts in our constitution, and at the moment the especially left wing of the German Bundestag, including the Social Democrats, but also mainly the Green Party, are very in favor of getting rid of this constitutional part, just due to the fact there is at the moment no interest rates, so it's easy to get money for a state, and of course we need money for investment. And this is two of the main guidelines that we will negotiate tomorrow also with the Green Party. If besides this there is things that we can work on together, and hopefully we will find a way to negotiate with the big parties, having a common, if you want to, standard that we will be discussing on. Well, Ulm is still, that's my constituency actually. Ulm is still Baden-Württemberg, but you're absolutely right. The company, it's a machine manufacturing company, is on the Bavarian side. It's New Ulm, well actually Senden, that's where the factory is located. So I'm kind of crossing borders every day, but I consider myself still to be Swabian, from Baden-Württemberg and so-called Schwabe, yes.
Very, very good. And I want to ask you also a bit about your experience as someone who runs his own company. But before we get to this, you are talking about the real challenges that the FDP will finding common ground with the Greens. But then after that, if they are successful, they then have to find common ground with the SPD. Do you think that's possible? Because Christian Lindner has obviously and very openly said that he would much prefer a coalition with the Christian Democrats, with Armin Laschet. But looking at the news this morning in Germany, I think the CDU currently is rather collapsing and thinking about being part of the next government. But what is the challenge once you can find common ground with the Greens? What is, so to say, more difficult, the Greens or the SPD?
Well, I think the strategy is exactly the right one. Why? Because, of course, we know Olaf Scholz, and he's very good at tactics. So we want to at least make sure that he doesn't play the cards against us. So the minute that he's negotiating with the Green Party and the Liberals, that the Liberals and the Green Party start to fight about the topics, and the Social Democrats or the Christian Union is kind of the third party in the middle, just waiting for us to get the fight done. We just want to avoid this. So this is why I believe the strategy is exactly the right one, to first settle out our stuff, Greens and the Liberals, before we start the negotiations. Of course, there's lots of, there is some points in our programs where we will get together quite easily, especially if you look at the society part of our politics, but mainly when it comes to economic policies and when it comes to taxation and those kind of questions, there's a huge gap between the Green Party and the Liberal Party, definitely. So we'll have to figure out some of the key issues before we start the negotiations. I absolutely agree with I think the majority of the Liberal Party is absolutely in favor of what we call Jamaica coalition, of a coalition under the Christian Democratic Union, but this looks very improbable at the moment. Vice versa is the Green Party more or less interested in having what we call traffic light coalition under the Social Democratic Party, because the alignment of the Green Party program and the Social Democratic program is much bigger or much higher than ours, and vice versa the same. The other side with the Liberals, we are much more aligned with the Christian Democratic Union. It's quite normal that after losing an election, there is a personal debate within the party. So I'm not quite sure whether Armin Laschet, I actually believe he will not be able to stay in office within his own party. He will not be able to stay the party leader. But it would make sense for the Christian Union to do the same thing the SPD did last time when Martin Schulz lost the election, to at least start the negotiations rather quickly, so to leave Armin Laschet, or to give him the mandate to negotiate. If the Christian Democratic Union starts the whole discussion right now, they will lose way too much time. Now, we don't have the time to wait until the Christian Union has formed its new board or has formed its new personal, has got its new people to negotiate with. So it would be in favor for everybody that the Christian Union is, whatever they do in the future, that now they get ready to at least negotiate with the parties. Personally, I agree. I have trouble imagining what the Christian Union is willing to offer or able to offer the Green Party. And especially if you look at the voters and the basis of the Green Party, I'm not quite sure how you would convince them that probably going into a Jamaica coalition would also be a win for the Green Party. So I'm just missing, my imagination is not big enough to think on what they could offer. Whereas the Social Democrats, of course, are in a more comfortable situation or position at the moment. But you're right, Christian Lindner and also Armin Laschet and others have already mentioned that they would be in favor of a Jamaica coalition. And personally, I believe this would be the better, well, let's put it this way, for German economy, I believe it would be easier within a Jamaica coalition to find solutions for future growth, for future prosperity, and for questions that are challenging the German economy in the future.
I'll certainly come back in a minute to the FDP, and I also want to talk about Christian Lindner and the experience, or let's maybe say even the trauma of 2017. But Bobby, can I please bring you in right now, because Alexander was just talking about that probably from a business perspective, a Jamaica coalition would be the preferable one, although for now it doesn't look so likely. So what do you think is the perspective of a traffic light Ampel coalition, and what does that mean for German, European and global business, you think?
Well, maybe I think one important thing is, let's take a step back and look at the world, right? And because I do think a lot, we have a very micro discussion at the moment of Germany, but let's look what's happening in the world. So if you think about it, what are the big topics globally? Globally, inflation is going up. That, for Germans has big implications. It has big implications for housing. This is why I think in Canada, Trudeau was struggling. I think it was a key driver of why Olaf Scholz SPD went up. So I think we have, gas prices going through the roof. And this will have important implications because, the gas prices going up will weaken a bit the argument from the Greens of saying we have to transition fast. Certainly, inflation going up will strengthen the FDP call for control on monetary policy, on a correct monetary policy. And then if you go through the countries, you see, the US is only strengthening its position versus China. Germany will have to start really deciding. The US, UK are all raising taxes, and in the UK it's a conservative government. In the US it's obviously a Labour one. And I think this will make it problematic for parties like the FDP on the no taxation increase, because if everybody around it is doing it, it clearly becomes a much less of a no-go. Then you have obviously the French watching. I mean, Macron is in a very big hurry. He has his own elections coming up. He has the G7 presidency taking on 1st of January, the EU presidency. So he needs, the French will for sure be begging the Germans to be very fast, because they need to really show that they can get things done. And at the same time, if you look to Italy, we have, the prospective move of the presidency in February. What will happen with Draghi, who's obviously a key part of stability right now. So overall, I think the key thing of this German election is that it is happening at a time when there is massive change going on in the world, and quite fast. This is not slow change, it's really fast. And I do think that what will happen when we have Merkel now gone is there will not be any more Merkel without Merkel. Right? I mean, there will be massive internal and external pressure on Germany to take decisions. So from that point of view, I do think that, Germany will be forced to take decisions that under Merkel, she was incredibly successful at just kicking the can down the road. So I do think it is from a overall business perspective. Yes, if you just look at the micro level, then obviously a Jamaica coalition would be more preferable for business. But my bigger view here is, like Merkel, if we think about it, Merkel economically has done nothing. I mean, Merkel has completely rode the wave of Schröder's reforms, which then tells me traffic light, right? Because to be honest, I mean, Schröder has laid all the economic strength of Germany. The big difference, though, and if we now go a little bit on the big picture German situation, is Germany after a long chancellor, let's say Adenauer, Kohl, and now Merkel, we luckily always had a reformist chancellor. So that covers Erhard after Adenauer. It was obviously Schröder after Kohl. And so I do think that business, first and foremost, hopes for a reformer, because there is really a lot Germany needs to get done. From that point of view, probably Alexander will fully agree. I mean, their motto is, a lot. There's a lot to do, and this is very, very true. I do think that also overall business in Germany is very keen, and politics really needs to catch up with that. And so from that perspective, I would actually say, Scholz is not the problem. The problem is the left wing on the SPD, which is why Scholz needs the FDP. In fact, he actually needs them. So to be honest, I'm not too worried about an Ampel coalition. In fact, I do think that's probably the coalition which has more legitimacy to win, because overall, I would say the Union beat themselves. There was zero unity. The leadership was missing. So I do think that the Ampel is deserved. And as I said, the biggest reforms were done under Schröder. So I have no problem in as long as the FDP is in government, which I do think they will be. Maybe one last thing, just big picture, I think is important for the discussion. What worries me about Germany compared to Schröder, the Schröder years of 2000. Remember, in 2000, Germany, the headline was the sick man of Europe in The Economist. But back then, Germany had the industrial capabilities, and Germany was panicking mentally. And so really, it was ready for these big reforms. My big problem now is that Germany has become from an industrial leader to a digital laggard. So we are weak now, but at the same time, oddly, we are complacent. So it is a very big sense of continuations, like continuation what? Germany needs to seriously take over very important reforms. And so this worries me a bit that 20 years ago, we were actually strong industrially, but I would say weak in our confidence. And now we are weak industrially, but for some odd, highly complacent. And so, I think the key thing for business is a government that actually takes and moves the country towards the many key reforms. Maybe I'll leave it there.
Thank you. And I forgot to say that all of you, the audience, I think we have almost 60 people in this Zoom webinar. You are very, very much invited to send in your questions. So we will, I think in around 20 minutes, we're going to open a Q&A. So whatever you prefer, either put your questions in the chat, or you can also raise your hand and ask Alexander and Bobby your questions. If I may stay with you for one moment, Bobby, the question, because you were talking about the wider level, the global level. And I think in Brussels and also in Paris, a Chancellor Olaf Scholz will be much more welcome than a Chancellor Armin Laschet, in the sense of that now, post-pandemic, there needs to be a reform of the Stability Pact. There need to be also, Olaf Scholz has openly said that he wants to go into a stronger financial and union, even only qualified voting on foreign affairs decisions, but especially if you look at the economic question, the question of the Eurozone and how the Eurozone can be strengthened. Do you think there's optimism because the SPD will be more willing to say, not forget, but be more flexible about fiscal discipline?
Well, the thing is, I do think people overrate the fact that, a center-left in Germany is probably center-right in the South, right? So people do think that it would be better to have for debt mutualization. But I don't think necessarily that's the case. At the end of the day, even if you look at the biggest critics of the Italian proposal for the European growth funds, the recovery funds, was actually the Greens in the European Parliament. I mean, the German Greens. They were pointing out that there is nothing green about buying tractors, for example. You know, they are still run on diesel. So what was funny is, like, you know, they may be Greens, but first and foremost, they are Germans in their way of thinking. And so I personally think as long as the FDP is there, which Scholz needs to keep his left wing of the party in check, the situation in Europe will highly depend on what happens now in Italy. I mean, obviously, the funds flowing into Italy is massive. We have an incredible opportunity there with a highly respected leader under Draghi, that these reforms or that this money hopefully ends up in the right place. But obviously, if all this money either gets misspent or doesn't kick off growth, then it doesn't really matter which side of the party in Germany you are. I think we have a very, very serious problem. So I do think that the bigger issue for Europe is, and hopefully that Italy deploys the money going there now as good as possible, because if that doesn't work out, then I don't think we have a lot of chance. The other thing where Germany probably will be quieter is, if you think about Macron going into his elections, he will need some wins. And I do think that there is no coincidence that von der Leyen put this European Security Summit just into March before the election to give him some win on, you know, European autonomy. But I do think it's going to be just a lot of words. I mean, you saw it. It was very interesting in this US, UK, Australia pact, how silent everybody has been in Europe, obviously except the French. But all I'm saying is, I do think there's going to be a lot of noise. I do think that, you know, again, I don't think Scholz can be in government without the FDP, and the FDP will get the finance ministry and the Greens will get foreign. But I don't think that you know, we should now suddenly think that there will be debt mutualization or something like that. And again, I do think the biggest issue here is not Germany, it's Italy, and that hopefully, I would say at the same time, Draghi is the biggest hope, but also the biggest risk. Because if he fails, we have a serious problem.
Thank you. Alexander, if I could come to you again. And it would be, I think, really interesting to hear from your perspective as somebody who runs a company and is kind of representative of German business, and especially on the border between Baden-Württemberg and Bayern, and a company that is working in very high-end technology. What have been the worst hurdles that you experienced in the last year? And Bobby was talking about the lack of reform. So what had you been struggling with, and what needs to be done? And I mean, when I was in Germany over the summer and I spoke to friends and family about who they were going to vote for, and I heard time and again the sentence, Deutschland lebt von seiner Substanz. So Germany is basically living on this substance, and there's nothing new. I mean, if you looked at the absolutely bad rollout of the vaccines, that you had to fill out 15 pages handwritten to get a vaccine. These things, if you could just give a couple of examples of real life in Germany, and also what the next government can do about it swiftly. Thank you.
I'm happy to do this, but let me quickly get back, because exactly that's one of the issues. Angela Merkel's government, or especially Angela Merkel, was very much on the flow, as Bobby mentioned, of the Schröder agenda. And if you look at the Schröder agenda and the Social Democrats at the Schröder era, it was a completely different situation. Mainly the by then Minister of Economics, which is Wolfgang Clement. He was kind of one of the architects of the Agenda 2010, and that really saved the German economy during the crisis in 2008, and it helped us a lot. And Angela Merkel was very reform resistant. She was kind of continuity, and that's the disaster that we're in at the moment. So I do agree that the red green government in the 2000s helped the economy a lot to become a really strong economy after being the sick man in Europe. But there's one huge difference now to comparing two things. First of all, the character of Gerhard Schröder and Olaf Scholz. And secondly, as Bobby absolutely rightly mentioned, looking at the background of the Social Democrats. Now, in a new coalition, what do we expect? First of all, we can see now who are the new members of the Green Party. I have many friends within the Green Party, but until now, the Green Party group in the German Bundestag was a really realistic and I would say professional party group. You had many professional, also in foreign affairs, people like Franziska Brandner, like Omid Nuripur, even the so-called left side of the Green Party. I'm not talking about Anton Hofreiter and others, but you had a lot of realistic politicians who were following a realistic kind of policy making line. Now we have a lot of young people, Fridays for Future activists and others who were on the lists and who are in parliament. This will give, I believe this will shift the Green Party a little from what I would say a realistic policy-making party to a more ideological party with a lot of young activists who are now part of the party group. And I sense that even with friends within the Green Party, they are not too happy about this movement because they don't know how it will work out. Looking at the Social Democratic Party, it's the same issue. During the times of Gerd Schröder, we had a very strong, I would say, conservative part or economically friendly part within the Social Democrats called the Seeheimer Kreis. Now, the Seeheimer Kreis has almost vanished. There's a few people left. One of them would be Olaf Scholz. He's more part of the pro-business, pro-economic wing of the Social Democrats. But obviously, the left party has gained a lot of strength, also due to the fact that Angela Merkel went to the left. Now, if we look at Kevin Kühnert, Saskia Esken, Walter Borjans, and other party leaders within the Social Democratic Party, I'm not sure that Olaf Scholz, who doesn't have the character of Gerhard Schröder, just getting his head through the wall, whatever happens, that he has the power to keep his own people by the line. And the FDP won't be able to help him. In real politics, everything depends on the coalition contract. So once you have formed the coalition, it's not like the FDP, everything that's not in the coalition contract can be renegotiated. You need all three parties to align if you want to continue with something that's not on the contract. But getting the contract done, that's actually the key fact, because even if the finance ministry, which is a wish of the Free Democratic Party to be in charge of the finance ministry, which is probably the most powerful ministry besides, of course, the chancellery, it will give you the power to define budgets, yes, but it won't give you the power to stop, I would say, or to help Olaf Scholz within his own party. I would even believe that in the traffic light coalition, one thing could happen, that every time the Free Democratic Party is blocking something like when it comes to tax or taxation or others, where the Green Party and the Social Democrats are actually in favor of, and probably the Free Democratic Party says, sorry, we can't go along with that, it will lead to the what we call in Germany Schwarze Peter Spiel. So we will be the guys with the bad card in the end. And that doesn't help in a coalition. You don't get elected for blocking things. You get elected for reforming things. Now, definitely especially the Green Party and the Free Democratic Party are very much in favor of getting reforms done. This is why it's so important to have these negotiations, these pre-negotiations now these days, to align where we get these reforms done. Whereas even though the SPD claims it, I don't see the SPD able to do it, just because of the fact that their own party is still, they kept quiet now during the election. But if you look at the structure of the own party, having a very left wing fighting against what I would say the remaining conservatives or the remaining conservative wing within the Social Democratic Party, let's see what happens. Bobby is absolutely right. We have to look at it in a global context, or at least in a European context. There's a lot of changement that will happen. Draghi is one of the key figures, definitely. The other one is Macron, running for elections next year, having the presidency at the same time, so also setting the agenda on the European Union. Now, I'm not quite sure. I know both candidates a little bit. Olaf Scholz, obviously, because he's been the vice chancellor. He's in parliament very often as the finance minister. And Armin Laschet is completely different. I'm not a big fan. I think I can admit that. And Stefanie, you were asking at the beginning whether I can speak openly. Yes, of course, but I always did. Even as an MP, I never had the issue to speak completely openly and free of my heart. But looking at the people playing this game at the moment, We know that Armin Laschet is very Francophile. He is used to working with the French very closely. He knows he has a lot of contacts in France. He's working very closely with the French administration. Olaf Scholz himself is more of a bureaucratic guy. He is also well connected, mainly when it comes to the finance ministries all over. And when he was the mayor of Hamburg, he also had, or the state leader of Hamburg, if you want to, he also got connections, especially through the Hanse, etc. But looking at Europe in the upcoming year, of course, there will be a shift from the view from Germany, where Angela Merkel is the oldest head of government, if you want to 16 years, she's out of office now. So what will happen? Who do you call in Europe? Will you still call Germany? Whether it will be Olaf Scholz, or most probably it will be Olaf Scholz, or will you call somebody else? I believe there will be a shift towards France, especially because their agenda setting, and I'm quite sure that Macron will use the possibility for the agenda setting to point out French views within Europe, because he has to win this election, and he knows it's going to be a tough election for him. There will be quite some challenges. What will be better for Germany? Olaf Scholz, whom I have never experienced to be close alignedly with the French, but probably he is, or Armin Laschet, who's a very Francophile guy. I don't know. Let's see. But I absolutely agree that the third person that really plays a role is Mario Draghi, who's also very well connected globally. He knows the people from his previous role. Let's see where these things lead. One thing the Free Democratic Party is very skeptic about is this Schuldenunion, is the possibility, or now the Green Party calls it investment union. Yes, there's a lot of things we can debate about it, and I accept the views of the Green Party that it doesn't make sense to not have any further debts in a situation where you have no interest rates. The problem why the Free Democratic Party is so tough on that point is mainly because we want to show that the biggest economy within Europe is also an economy that is looking for financial stability, that is for financial discipline. If we loosen up the way that countries may get debts from on, then obviously this will be an example to other countries within the European Union. And at some point, we really have to consider what will happen with all this money. We don't mind if the money is invested in investments that do have a return on invest in a certain time. But of course, especially on the leftist side, there is an idea to put it into consumptive investment, such as pension funds. We don't have, until now, we don't know, we haven't solved the issue on how we're going to pay our pensioners. The people, there is no money, there is keine Rücklagen. And that's kind of a disaster that will hit us in the next few years. So there's lots of things. When it comes to the economy and the burdens that have happened, there has been some reforms, even in the Angela Merkel era, unfortunately not reforms into the right way. They weren't reforms into what we call investment into the future. If I just may point out a few legal acts that were, for example, Germany is very dependent on the global markets. Of course, we have those hidden champions, Mittelstand companies like myself. We're active in 30 countries at the moment with ESTA. So if I consider these companies, and then I look at the laws just being passed, we have reformed for the third time now the Außenwirtschaftsgesetz, which is a law, or if you look at the Supply Chain Act, which is quite new. It's a very new law that we just a few months ago that we passed through the Bundestag. We wanted to set an example also on the European side. They are negotiating the Supply Chain Act on the European side, but let's be very honest, this is a bureaucratic monster. And people always say it's only a law that's applicable for the big companies with more than 3,000 employees. That's true. That's completely rubbish. That's just not true, because of course it's a Supply Chain Act. So the big companies such as Daimler, BASF, and all the others, they will have to by contract, they will have to oblige smaller countries that are supplying them to also have all these bureaucratic burdens, like et cetera, and those kind of reforms, they make it very difficult and very hard for the German economy, even in the last few years, because we have less limited space to kind of breathe. It's so much bureaucratic and work that we have to do, and there's several laws in the past that have been forwarded by the German government that made life very, very hard for Germans. So what we definitely need as a reform is we need less bureaucracy. We need more flexibility also on the economic sector. And this is one thing that we would definitely hope for. Let's see how the new government is able to do this, because we have an ideological issue, whereas the party, as well, the Social Democrats, as actually every party in German government, in German parliament, is trying to impose its own ideas by educating the people, or educating the people the way they would love to see society. So putting up laws to make the good ecological citizen, or putting up laws to have a good conservative citizen. And that's the wrong approach. I mean, I very much admire Britain for that, or even the United States or others. They have a more libertarian approach. So the consideration that civil society and the people themselves are the sovereign of the democracy. It's not the politician who's the sovereign. It's not the chancellor. It's not our task as politicians to kind of educate the people. So this kind of Bevormundungspolitik has to stop, especially for the economy. And that's a very, very difficult task. Looking at the 735 members at the moment, I don't see how we're going to stop this bureaucratic burden in the future.
We talked now quite a lot about Europe and the focus on France. And I already get quite a lot of questions here by British friends or also British media. What does this all mean for Britain? So the new government in Berlin. And I also got quite a lot of questions or almost angry comments, because Olaf Scholz, I think on Monday, said that the problems with the lorries and the fuel crisis in Britain was a consequence of Brexit. I think certain people here don't like this comment from the probably future German chancellor. But Bobby, if I may ask you, the idea that France is becoming now the strong country in Europe for a while, I guess that's not very much what the Brits would hope for if you look at recent relationship, when it comes to the row around refugees in the Channel, and the Brits blaming the French that they don't stop the dinghies leaving the coast in Calais, or obviously now very much AUKUS, the Trilateral Security Pact. So relations between Britain and France are not very good. And there's always the hope that, and it was in the Brexit years a bit the game, wasn't it? The good guy, Angela Merkel, the bad guy, Macron. So where do you see British-German relations going now? And how much contact is there actually between the SPD and well, British politicians or even Labour? My impression is they have been rather thin in the last years.
Look, I fully agree, and let me start with the last part, because I also try to help there, be involved in that relationship. And what happens, there's very few. So for number one, there's very few German politicians who really have the telephone number or the mobile number of a British politician to just give a call, just see. Now, they don't meet in Brussels anymore. The shift happened obviously because of the Conservative Party. We had a very big change in terms of people. And then I have to say, look, there's really only one MP and minister who continuously makes an effort to go to Germany, which is Greg Hunt. He takes a lot of abuse, by the way, because all the time he gets, criticized for Brexit, but at least, somebody goes. But obviously that shows you that there's very little appetite for other British politicians to go to Germany to get abused, basically. So on the Conservative side, what happens is, because of that shift in Britain, very little communication. On the SPD side, I was 2 weeks ago in Berlin and speaking with a senior SPD person. And for them, the Labour under Corbyn created quite some estrangement. I mean, he told me about a meeting they have had with the British Labour, and it was very, very odd under Corbyn. The whole Labour under Keir Starmer is one, obviously, since the pandemic, so they haven't met. So again, we don't have this on the SPD. The Greens in Germany and the Greens in Britain are completely different people. The Liberals in Germany and the Liberals in Britain, completely different people. So overall, I would agree, the relationship is quite, I don't think, good at all. From a point of view, good in terms of that they actually speak. Now, obviously, one can see with Merkel's visit to Britain in June, I think it was, or July, that there is now the plan to, on an annual basis, to bring the cabinets together. That most likely will also lead to a broader circle of MPs meeting. So I do think that probably it can only become better from here, because I do also see in meetings I attend that 2-3 years after Brexit, there was still a lot of nostalgia going on, while now it's more and more realist talk, right? It's like, okay, it has happened, and now how can we, there are many challenges we need to do together, and how can we stay close, and where is it where we can not stay close? What has happened on the British side, my observation is, I think they hoped that France would be bad boy and Merkel friendly, but that's not what turned out. I don't think Britain considered Germany friendly. That has certainly led, I think, to a pivot in British policy towards the US and Asia. I mean, it was planned anyways, but it's certainly, it's a little bit like the view that, look, if the relation, it's almost considering now that, okay, this relationship is going to be rocky for a couple of years. And so this is why I do think, and you see a very strong pivot towards the US, Anglophone countries, and Asia. Personally, I find it way more difficult to get a British politician, for example, to come to Berlin for something, way more difficult than 2 years ago. But again, is because also they do not see that it is in any, they don't find it useful. Let's call it like this, which is maybe also what Berlin wanted, right? I mean, to make sure that Europe. Now, going to the French, I do think that the French, and this is obviously me as a German saying this, have an excellent ability to look after their own strategic interests, but claiming that they are European. And I think I honestly, personally congratulate them for that, because at least they have a strategy. The big problem of Germany is we have no strategy. There is no blueprint. I mean, we have one strategy, which is climate. Everybody agrees on that. That's very, very easy. But otherwise, zero strategy. And I think it would almost be also useful for Europe if Germany would very clearly say what is its self-interest, what is its strategy, because that would help other people to organize themselves. So I do think, to have the biggest and most powerful country in Europe without a strategy is borderline dangerous. And as I said, the French, it is self-interest clearly, in many, many things they do. Which is also a lot of their animosity towards Britain in many areas. And I'm not saying Britain is not at fault. I mean, Britain has also done many things, but there is a lot of things that is I would say manufactured animosity to make sure that whatever, they benefit as much as possible from Brexit. Fine, it's a strategy, and but I do think rather than, like, let's say, checking France, is Germany needs to first define what is their strategy. What is what is Germany's strategy beyond climate? I mean, climate we all agree. I mean, it's a bit, but on foreign policy, etc. And this is, I think, something where Germany is utterly lacking.
Looking at the clock, I think we should start opening now the floor. And may I start with you, Alexander Altmann? I can see your hand raised, and then I'm going to go into the chat. Alexander, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes. Thank you, Stefanie, for the very interesting conversation so far. Bobby said that Germany used to be an industrial leader, but is now weak industrially and also lags behind digitally. One industry which has been defining Germany's economic success, in my view, has always been the car industry. Would you agree, Alexander and Bobby, that the current state of our car industry indicates that we are way behind with our industrial modernization and digitalization, and what is now required to catch up with the US and China, especially in the car industry?
Alex, you want to start, or shall I go?
If you want to, please feel free to go, Bobby.
You first. You're the businessman.
Well, but I'm also a libertarian politician, so I'm not quite sure whether these questions can always be solved only by political sides. You're absolutely right, Alex. And one of the main issues that we're facing is that the car industry was, there's two things. For one, the car industry, the German car industry, was very much focusing on, well, what we were very successful on in the past. So we didn't really take into consideration where the industry is heading to. If you look at Tesla, if you look at NIO in China, if you look at other electric cars, etc., etc. Now, but still, we will need a combustion engine for many, many years in the future. But we don't want it in Europe anymore. So what might happen? And the main issue that the car industry is facing, like any other industry, is the burden, is that the things they have to mingle with the whole time, of course, you can't compare the car industry to family-owned companies because they are managed by managers that will change if necessary, and etc. But I believe if we look at the growth rate of Germany compared to the growth rate of other nations at the moment, especially United States and China and others, we are lacking way behind. So besides not being a digital nation, and still being the industrial nation with all the Mittelstand companies, with machine manufacturing, medical devices, but also the car industry, we're lacking behind in our growth rate. And if we look at the car industry politically, we give them a very hard time. So either by the court decisions that are taken once in a while, that cost a lot of money for the car industry. Secondly, by the political decisions interfering all the time into the car industry, telling them how they should develop in the future, how they should reform the car industry. It's not a question of the politics deciding on the reforms. The reforms have to be taken by the market. So the politicians very have to influence the market by saying, yes, we don't want carbon emission in the future, etc. But the question how the car companies are matching this is not a question of the politicians. So putting up electromobility as being this target for the future is the wrong way. We have to leave it open. It might also be hydrogen. It might also be some not yet invented technology that is just as carbon neutral. So I'm asking myself whether it's the right approach that all the time government and politicians interfere in how the reforms should look like, rather than keeping the reforms up to the companies, keeping them the technological openness, and leaving the companies the space to develop. Of course, some companies will go bankrupt, and probably it will even be the car companies in the future. We don't know. But this is how the market works. And as long as we have new innovation and new things coming up, that's fine. The problem is at the moment we have just not enough innovation. We have just not enough startups. We don't have finance on that side. So the only thing that Germany is still relying on is the family companies and the family businesses. They are huge, those hidden champions, Braun-Melsungen, etc., etc. That's what the real power of the German economy is at the moment. It's not the car industry anymore, I think. There's many jobs still involved in the car industry, but there's much more to the German economy than the car industry.
I mean, I have to say, I couldn't agree more with Alex. In fact, not the fund I manage exactly invests into European hidden champions, and many are Germans. And because I think Europe has been a little bit flyover country. Everybody has just looked at the digital monsters in the US and the huge market in China. Europe, and especially Germany, has really a huge amount of highly innovative companies. And I would even say I'm very positive because they are strong industrially. They have a strong product. Now imagine that they adopt digital. I mean, they could really be flying. And I do think the pandemic really has woken us up. That my family is in Germany. My family obviously is here, and me seeing all my kids were immediately on laptop and iPad and the school fully digitally connected. And in Germany, they were dreaming of this. And so I really think I think the pandemic for Germany was a Sputnik moment, that they realized, oh my God, I mean, this is serious. And so I actually think the fact that we are still, as Alex said, that we are a hidden champion country industrially, but where digitalization is still ahead of us, that can turn you massively bullish if that happens. And I fully agree with him. I think what does it require is leave it to the industry. Don't try to regulate or over-regulate. The good old Ludwig Erhard. You be the referee on the game, but don't play for the state. And if I specifically on the car industry, I think what is interesting is, if you think about it, China strategically, probably 10 years ago, looked at the car industry and said, the Europeans and the Americans have such an advantage in the combustion engine, we can never catch up with them. And they actually massively invested into electric vehicles back then. It's the biggest market in electric vehicles in the world. But purely because they, took the strategic decision that this is an area where we can create our own competition. Now, we cannot compete with 1.5 billion market size. If we look to the Americas, how come Tesla is, and Elon Musk is the richest guy in the world? Capital markets, right? I mean, the US just provides you with the capital. And I do think what is very important for Germany to consider, I mean, I would say this because I work in finance, but I think what is very important for Germany to consider is, at the moment, Germany is a banking market, but the banks are highly regulated. And so it's a weak banking market. I mean, you just have to look at the share price of German banks and you see that on the floor. On the other hand, Germany is also not a capital market like the US or the Anglo-Saxons or the UK. So what you cannot have is both a weak banking market and a weak capital market, because then you're nothing. Because if you look at China, it's strong banks. If you look at the US, it's strong capital markets, and you need one of both. And this obviously speaks for the capital market union. And here, for example, I do think that the knowledge and insight from Britain can be extremely helpful for Germany, and Germany has always had a very close relationship, where Germany should have its own strategic interests in mind of how can we collaborate with the British on their knowledge and advantage in financial markets, and not necessarily maybe listen to what may be French prerogatives of cutting the British out as much as possible. So, I think, for all German industries, we need financing, and that can either just come from banks or it has to come from capital markets. And at the moment, both are weak.
Thank you both. Again, looking at the clock, I think we really need to start looking at the questions. There are lots of interesting questions. And if I could ask you to maybe try to answer in short version. So the first question comes from Andreas Quelle, and this question goes to you, Alexander. Are you for new elections? And this is behind the phenomenon that the Greens stagnated finally, and the CDU grew in the last days. So would you think there should be a new election? And maybe you could link that with the question whether Christian Lindner can actually afford pulling out once more.
Okay, now I tried to answer this question already by personal message on the chat, but absolutely I don't think it's a good idea. Re-elections at the moment would not be appreciated by anybody in Germany. Just look at the disaster that we had in Canada when Trudeau thought, oh, okay, that might be an opportunity. Let's just have new elections during the COVID pandemic. In Germany, it would not have any success in any way, and it wouldn't make things easier. I'm quite sure we would still stay at a free party coalition negotiation afterwards. So it's up to the politicians now to get this challenging act done. And I think at the moment we behave much more professional than we did in the last elective period in 2017 with Jamaica. Can Christian Lindner afford to break up once more? Not as easily as last time. But there is red lines that have to be considered, because one thing, I think the trustworthiness in the FDP has grown. Until now, the FDP very often had been kingmaker and very often was a coalition partner for both the Social Democrats and the Union. But there was this kind of a reluctant feeling, especially within the Christian Union. I'll just give the Free Democrats another car and another ministry, and then they're going to be fine. They're going to sign anything as long as they're in government. And I think that has been proven last time, that the Free Democrats are not willing to accept anything just to be in government. And that this also made the burden a little higher for other parties. And I think this is why it's so important now to speak with the Green Party and then approach the big parties, just to make sure we're very happy to go into a government, but at least we need to be considered when it comes to the program. Every party has to offer something to its voters. Otherwise, the whole system doesn't work. I don't see that there's a risk of breaking up this time, just due to the fact that this time very early, some of the parties at least came out and said those are the red lines. If these red lines are crossed, we cannot continue negotiation. We cannot go into a coalition, and that was one thing missing last time. And these red lines are not they are not completely out of a realistic kind of, it's not a wishful thinking or something. These are red lines that I think can be considered by all partners. So I believe there's a very strong chance to get a coalition done. And personally, I'm quite positive that it might happen quicker than most people believe at the moment. Many people think it's so complicated, this might take till January, February, March. I don't think so. I think this time there's a much more professional approach to it. And I'm very hopeful that probably even by November or December, we'll already have a government.
Thank you. Next question by Christopher McGinty. Is there any realistic chance of another grand coalition, just SPD-led this time? I think that goes to you as well, Alexander, because you are in the country. And
there is, but that very much depends on the Christian Democratic Union and what happens within the union right now. So if I believe that there will be a shift in the union to the more conservative wings, the wing that had huge issues during the Merkel times. So if you look at figures like, I don't know, Christian von Stetten, Carsten Linnemann, also Norbert Röttgen, people that didn't have a chance within the Angela Merkel era, that they might sense now the possibility to regain a little more the power in the Christian Democratic Union. The Christian Democratic Union has a problem not being in government. That's, for them, it's a very hard thing to imagine. We've seen that in Baden-Württemberg in the last state election. It would have been in favor for especially the Christian Democratic Union to go into the opposition for some time to recover themselves a little bit. Usually opposition does help in German politics to recover. Now the Christian Democratic Union is dependent on so many different posts, etc., etc. They are not very happy with that idea. So there is a chance that there might be negotiations if it's too tough for the Social Democrats to find a solution with the Greens and the Yellows, which I don't think will happen. But then there might be also a chance that they approach the Christian Union, a union they already know, and there might be a chance that the union just sells itself out. There is a chance of a big coalition just the other way around with a red chancellor. I don't see it as very big though, because the German population wouldn't want that. That's definitely one thing that the Germans are not happy on, another big coalition and continuing the way everything was just with another chancellor. But there's a risk.
Next question from Kevin Franke. Comparing the two possible coalitions, so SPD or CDU-led, so traffic light or Jamaica, what would be the major differences? Which topics would be preferentially pursued either way? Don't know, Bobby or Alexander, who wants to answer?
I think Alex probably better positioned for that, and maybe I'd take the Nord Stream question after.
I think the main difference would really lie within the tax, the question of how to how these new challenges and reforms should be financed and how. So I think with the traffic light coalition, it will be harder to reform the state from inside, looking at where we have expenses that are not necessary, where we might be able to reform the state administration. And there's lots of money that we can save, I believe, by reforming and digitalizing also our state administration. This will be much harder to convince with the Social Democrats and the Green Party. So I think there will be deficits on that. It might be easier with but I think the main differences really lie in the fiscal area, or in the question, how do we finance and how taxation will continue. Other than this, there's an alignment of both sides, and it really depends on the negotiation talks now. Both the Greens and the Liberals are the key makers in this coalition, in this period. So there will be reforms, I'm very sure, and both will accept it, either the Social Democrats and the Union. It's more of a question how to finance them, in my opinion.
Let's maybe then, shall we go to the Nord Stream question, or Bobby, do you want to add something?
No, I think it just because obviously the next one, just to go, as you say, in the context of time, to go through the Nord Stream 2 question. I think what is, in talking about, that the world continues rotating while we are having the elections, is what is interesting, if you, obviously, anybody who follows the news or gas prices knows that they have exploded, and part of it obviously is global supply chain and their revamp after COVID. But also what is very clear to see is that the inventories of gas are especially low from the Russian side. So they are clearly keeping gas back and pushing prices up. And I would speculate that that has to do with Nord Stream 2, i.e. that to make it almost impossible at the moment to switch it off, because to be honest with, or to not kick it on, let's call it like this, because we are risking at the moment an incredibly tricky winter in Europe if the temperatures drop or if we have a cold winter. And so I do think that at the moment, Nord Stream 2, if this was a situation where we didn't have this incredible shortage in gas, would probably be on the line because of, as iPad says, especially the Greens are against it. But given the gas shortage we have, I do think that most likely there will be no choice but to kick it on.
Yeah, thank you, Bobby. Sorry for jumping in now, but Stefanie, who I still want to thank you for moderating today's panel. I think she did an excellent job and asked the right questions. She has to leave now since she has an interview with someone we all know, and I think we will read about soon. So maybe we just continue with the last question. And I think the next question, Bobby, is one for you as well, and it relates to the car industry, asked by Georg Baumgarten. Nobody stopped the car industry to start innovation years ago, but like the catalyst was only brought in after regulation made it obligatory, and carbon low cars were only developed after regulation came. Although very often the state had made clear that it did not want to regulate if the industry would go ahead by itself, it did not. Does that have to do with a very conservative attitude supported by a tendency to recruit top managers for big stock companies from a more and more, it's quite a long question though, from a more and more closed conservative group, partly from some families linked to the board members? The Greens will tend to overregulate, the FDP will tend to underregulate, and SPD or CDU may have to mediate. So what's your comment on that, Bobby? It's a bit like a statement as well, I guess.
Yeah, but I think the overall Germany, let's say compared to France, has the balance right. We do not have this rotating door massively between business and politics as we have, for example, in France, where there's a continuous, manager rotation between big French companies and government, and it's considered very normal. That in Germany we don't have, and I don't think would be accepted. On the other hand, we do have a certain closeness of businesses with government that, for example, in Britain doesn't exist. I mean, I was once at a very interesting call with a senior German minister, and one British baroness asked, she said, well, with all these scandals going on, Volkswagen, Deutsche Bank, and then obviously what was it again? The one which went bankrupt last summer, the Wirecard. She said, "Is there a problem with German governance?" And the German minister said, "Oh, that's a very good point. I actually had never thought of this like this, but given that you mentioned these cases, there clearly is." So I do think, overall, the principle in Germany, which is pretty much what Ludwig Erhard left us, of that the state should be the referee but not a player, a little bit is reflected, I think, in what Georg said, that yes, obviously regulation is good here and there. In fact, I think nobody has a problem with regulation as long as it is not too much and contradictory, right? I mean, and I think, everybody who lives in London and has seen, Grenfell Tower burn down, and then looks at why it happened, is because there were so many regulations and so many people with a different hat on that then didn't bother they completely lost the big picture. and everybody was effectively just doing what they were supposed to do. And so I do think it's the overregulation what we need to combat, and really a little bit the thought that if we bring one regulation in, maybe two out, almost just as a discipline to make sure that because it is very easy to just regulate, and I do think here, you know, they having this open discussion. But I do definitely like of both the FDP and the Greens is that they are at least they have, you know, very strong ideas, but there is a very healthy discussion that goes on. So I'm actually quite I like it that it's actually Lindner and Habeck who are first having a discussion before they discuss with the big parties. So from that perspective is, you know, I don't think anybody, you know, in fact, every football game needs a referee. You just don't want the referee playing or the referee making, you know, or the three referees at the same time refereeing, because then we can stop the game.
Thank you. We got one last question in the chat.
Quickly jump in, Jörg, because I think it's
sure,
a question on how we regulate. So the question, how do you regulate? And Georg mentioned that absolutely right when it comes to catalysator, etc. What we need is framework regulation. What we don't need is these detailed regulations that are very often happening in Berlin. So to say, especially when it comes to the car industry, why do we have to put it all on electromobility? Why is not, for example, synthetic fuels, which is an innovation which is not as bad? Okay, it's not market ripe yet, but it's a very clever idea to have a combustion engine and still be carbon neutral. So why not accept these kind of innovations too? And that's why we need framework regulation. So the state only says you're not allowed to have any carbon emissions more than X. You're not allowed to have, etc. And then it's up to the companies to develop the ideas. And that's what we're lacking at the moment. We are lacking framework regulation. If you look at it in Germany, BGB, which is civil code, in the past, in 1900, this was created, and there were very clever articles in the code, such as Treu und Glaube, gute Sitten. So we call them general clauses. Now, since I'm in Parliament, we've never, ever made a general clause. But general clauses are very helpful for the industry, for innovation, etc. What we need is framework regulation rather than detailed regulation. And that's what we're lacking at the moment in Germany.
Thank you. Being a German lawyer by training myself, I think that's a very valid point. So if we go to the last question in the chat, if the Russians keep back gas, they would certainly not need Nord Stream 2. That is a certain contradiction. For Germany to have the pipeline does not mean that alternative supplies cannot be developed. LNG prices had for some time been utterly unattractive, but that changed, didn't it? I guess this is a question rather for you, Bobby, as well.
I mean, look, I mean, I do think one can see it from the, you know, the Russians before have many times switched off oil or gas supply to many countries to put those countries under pressure. And yes, the revenues go down, but they see it as a tactical or strategic move. So, and to be honest, if you look at the gas supplies at the moment, it is very visible that it is the Gazprom ones which are down. And there is no real obvious reason of why that should be. On the other hand, is you know, do we need it? Yes, but you know, there is. I don't think you can look at Nord Stream purely from an economic perspective. I mean, we create a lot of badwill in Eastern Europe because of it. Certainly in the US, and you know, Nord Stream has a big very big political angle to it that I do think is a big mistake, because look, ultimately, if in the European Union we cannot have, for example, a defense union, then ultimately we will not get any, or a foreign policy union. And I think Nord Stream 2 contributes to the fact that we have neither, because you know, the East perceives that Germany in that case clearly puts economic interest above everything else, and which leads to Poland to buy F-35s and not even consider you know, the FCAS. At the same time, a country like Estonia will say, no way will we have a foreign policy based on qualitative majority voting. It will be because, to be honest, I have to protect myself against, suddenly nobody caring about this, and the Baltic countries together, clearly would get outvoted under qualified majority voting. So I do think Nord Stream 2 economically obviously makes sense. I mean, I would say, ridiculous decision to switch off nuclear has put us into a big energy crisis position, which almost makes us captive to any energy we can get from anywhere. But I think the important thing is that the political implications of this hinder us to have a common foreign and defense policy. And I can assure you, if in the long term we don't have that, then then either we have to scale back Europe to a pure economic, like Asian trading zone, but otherwise, it will become a big problem, and that's why Nord Stream 2 is so important.
Thank you. And with these final remarks, I think we're closing up for today. Thank you again in the name of the British Chamber of Commerce in Germany here in the UK to Stefanie, to you, Alexander and Bobby, for being such excellent panelists. I think we didn't have just a discussion. We really had a really deep conversation here, and I for myself can say that I learned a lot. So thank you very much indeed. And thank you for everybody who joined us today. There were many participants, and we're grateful for you joining us. Thank you.